Hi, I'm Dr. Jamil Sayed, and on this podcast, we're going to talk about some deep stuff. I'm here to tell you that you're amazing, and often, the only person who can't see that is you. No matter who you are, what you do, or where you're from, there's greatness in you. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Jamil Sayed, and welcome to the Transformation Starts Today podcast, where I interview leaders, champions, and high performers from all walks of life as they share their stories, the lessons they've learned along the way, and empowering perspectives to help you create an extraordinary life without regret, starting today. Today we have with us Chris Reavis. Chris Reavis is a tech-savvy author on a mission to transform both work and family life, a leading parenting expert and go-to guide for boosting career satisfaction. He empowers readers to navigate challenges with practical, science-backed strategies. In Unleashed, Revis shares neuroscience-driven approaches to support children with autism, ADHD, and depression, helping families move beyond struggles to thrive. In his professional toolkit, Boost Your BS Resilience at Work, he provides 13 proven strategies to boost productivity and bring joy back to work. When not writing bestsellers like Unleashed, Boost Your BS Resilience at Work, and Hashrate, Chris enjoys the Pacific Northwest and his family, and Wonder Pup, Penelope. Chris, such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hey, my pleasure. Excited to be here, Dr. Jamil.
Yeah, man. You and I got to connect a few months back at an event, and I remember meeting you that first night. It was like there was a dinner that we got to attend with the different members,
Yeah.
and it was just I just connected with you right off the bat. I felt your heart, I felt your spirit, and it was a wonderful connection. And then get to know each other throughout that event, I got to be a guest on your show, and we had such a wonderful conversation. And now to get to be here and have you on our show, this is going to be fantastic. And for anyone who's here on video with us, you might notice I'm sitting on the floor with a door behind me. And the reason is I'm at an Airbnb several years ago. I've wanted to travel, around the world my whole life. And several years ago, I started to give myself permission to do that. And I always had a story. I always had a reason why I couldn't. And whether it was a financial story or a time story or whatever. And I finally let that go. And I started to travel more. And I'm currently at an Airbnb, and the Wi-Fi is not spectacular. And so I'm as close as I can be to this router. And if I go sitting in a table somewhere, it's going to probably cut in and out. And so I want to make sure this is as good as possible for everyone. So please forgive where I am. But beyond that, such a wonderful experience to be with you, Chris. And so I'd love to begin with, for our listeners who don't know you, they haven't heard your story. Can you please share with us who you are, what led you to where you are today, and what inspired you to do what it is that you do?
Yeah, 100%. So, most important thing in my life is being a dad and being a great supporter to my wife and my family, and then just serving as best I can at work, whatever work looks like. And that's many different facets for me. But I would say one thing on my journey that really shaped it, let's say around 10 years ago, is just this wake up call. I was a decent parent, loved my kids dearly, worked really hard at work, but I had this lane that I knew, which really ended up being a lane that builds, and most of us are in, honestly, and in the Western world, is all about building compliance, do this or else. Or with my kids, it was, to get the desired behavior, you do a rewards chart, right? And if you do all the things, you get gold stars and you move forward. And if you're not doing the things you desire, you get a timeout, right? And those worked really well for my neurotypical uh, daughter. And when I had a neurodivergent son, those things blew up, right? And they blew up at school, they blew up all the time. And it could be really easy to blame the kiddo in this case. Why aren't you stepping up to this, right? And the reality is, the way his brain works, which I learned deeply about, um, just going for that compliance, they're not going to be able to easily get to, because how they're literally born and
Mhm.
how their brain is wired. And so everyone gets frustrated, right? The kiddo's really unhappy. No one really wants to be, what I learned from these brilliant brain scientists, no one wants to be unhappy. No one wants to be stuck. No one wants to be a low performer. They're not looking out to get you. And yes, that's going to push on some parenting beliefs here, but mine included at the time. But a slightly different approach and understanding how the brain works had like miracles. And we can talk about some of the stories with my
Mhm.
son. And then I later up, just like as an experiment, tried it in my workplace. Now I modified it a little bit because even though your leadership style and your parenting style are similar, those are not my kids. So,
Mm,
the modality is different, but the approach and knowing how the brain works, and knowing how to set up people for a win is the same. And my teams loved it. My quote unquote lower performers, folks that would go on a performance improvement plan, were, solid B and sometimes A players, to put a label on it. Those aren't great labels, but that's what we use. And they weren't stuck anymore, and they were using their skills and thriving. And so, what's really cool about the approaches I learned, they work for everyone. You don't have to have autism or ADHD, or be going through major stress. You can be quote unquote normal, whatever that is, and enjoy these successes. So
yeah.
those are the amazing ahas for me, and it's my sort of side mission, or maybe it's my main mission, to get that story out there, so others don't have to be stuck in a very painful spot, right? When you're a leader and it's all
Mm,
on your shoulders and folks aren't performing well and it's like, "Arr," and you're gritting it out. That's an awful energy. And it's the
yeah.
same as a parent, when your kid's stuck or you get those phone calls from school. I would hate to look at my phone and see the caller ID be school. I'm like, ugh, something happened. I got to go pick my kiddo up. So the awesome news is there's some very simple things everyone can do, and it's brain based, and you can move through that. And
Mm.
that's really my spiel. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you, man. There's so many exciting things we're about to get to discuss. And I took a few notes based on things that you shared that I think are fantastic. Just the
Yeah.
opening line where you said, the most important thing to you is your wife and your kids and serving as best as I can. And I just use this as a loving challenge to everyone listening. Do you know what your priorities are? Do you know what's
Mm,
most important to you? Do you know how it is that you want to show up? Because in my mind, showing up from a heart of service is not only the best thing for others, it's the best thing for you. And when
yeah.
we come from the space of recognizing that if I really want a winning strategy that's sustainable over the long term, it has to involve other people winning too. It can't
Yeah.
just be about me. Because if it's just about me and I'm willing to screw people over, then what ends up happening is I might quote unquote win in the short term, but
Right.
nobody wants to work with me anymore after that. And so you crush your reputation, all those kind of things. And even if
Yeah.
somehow you're able to sustain that for a period of time, it's kind of miserable because you don't have nice relationships, you don't have good interactions. And so when Chris
Yeah.
said, nothing's more important to him than his wife and his kids. And he's coming from a space of how can I serve as best as I can? Chris and I do a lot of focus on work with leaders. And leaders, again, at least my own definition, you're not just born a leader, it's a
Mm,
choice that you can make. And I
mm,
love the distinction between courage and fearlessness. Courage is not the same as fearlessness. In my definition, courage requires fear to be present.
mm.
If there's no fear, courage isn't required.
Right.
And so if you recognize, okay, this is uncomfortable, this is scary, but there's something more important on the other side of this, I'm going to do it anyway. You're stepping into being a leader, and that's a choice. And so
Yeah.
where can you step up in your service? And so I just want to lay that down first for our audience. What are you committed to? Who are you committed to? What's most important? And how can you upgrade and elevate your degree or level of service that you're providing to your team, to your community, to your family? Like, what if I said the world needs a better version of you? And it's
Mm,
not to say that any of us are deficient. It's just saying that there's who we're being in this moment and there's who we're capable of being. And
yeah.
I firmly believe that every one of us is capable of so much more than we've been, let's say, how we've been showing up. And
Mm,
so from that space, I see that as exciting and hopeful. And from that space, where can you elevate your service? Because when you do that, everybody benefits.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you mentioned as well this idea of compliance. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because my girlfriend and I she's a clinical psychologist, and we were having this conversation like last week, I think. I was having, in my medical background, I remember being in medical school, and we would talk about patient compliance and this
Hmm.
idea that very often, a patient might not follow the treatment plan and they might not do what they said they were going to do and things of that nature. And my girlfriend shared a word with me that I know the word, but I never thought of it like this. And I can see it being a useful distinction to bring up here. She's like, I don't like that word compliance. I think adherence is way better.
Mm,
And then we looked it up on ChatGPT, like, what's the real difference there? And it
yeah.
was interesting that compliance is more about like, are you doing what I told you you should be doing?
Right.
And adherence is more like, are you doing the thing that you and I both agreed that like
Right.
you would do?
Right.
Adherence has more buy-in, it's got more of a like mutual like thing. And
Yeah.
compliance is more of a like top down, like you do what I say you're gonna do.
Right.
And it's just interesting that where can we recognize that, of course, when you're in a leadership role, when you've got people that are employees of yours, yes, it's your team, it's your name on the line, it's your business, it's whatever. And there's that old expression, I think it was Jim Rohn, but whoever said it, the idea that people are more willing to forward the plan when they played a part in creating it. I'm paraphrasing
Right.
that,
100%. Oh
right?
yeah.
And so if we come from the space of, am I just relying on compliance? Am I just relying on I'm the boss, do what I say? John
Sure.
Maxwell calls that level one leadership.
Yeah.
And it's like in his 5 levels of leadership, level one, I believe, it's like you're a leader in title.
Yeah.
So you're the boss because you've got the job title. And so
Right.
people follow you, but it's kind of just because they're afraid of losing their job. They don't respect you
Right.
necessarily, and they don't necessarily think you're a great leader. They're just doing
Right.
what you say because they think they need to. Now,
Yep.
that, from a level 5, 1 to 5 leadership, ideally you want to go up the ranks. And that's not how the best leaders lead. I think they do
No.
have some level of adherence where there's a mutual buy-in. Anything about
Yeah.
that you'd like to speak to?
Yeah, yeah, no, I like that word too. I mean, the distinction I make, and it's a similar one, is there's compliance and then there's building resilience. Now, I will
Yeah.
be the first to say some notion of compliance is important, right? When
Yeah.
someone's about to hurt themselves,
Oh
it's
yeah.
not a time to build resilience. It's we're going to jump on them and hug them and prevent them from hurting themselves, right?
Oh yeah.
Or
Oh yeah.
and there's certain rules of the road, right? You don't just kind of woo, I'm going to drive over here because that feels like fun, right? We have
Yeah.
compliance is important, so not like you don't give all of it away, but
Yeah.
the building resilience part is where all the magic happened for my son and for me as a leader. And resilience, as as a doctor, is in our cerebral cortex, right? It's where imagination and collaboration, all those things are in our executive functions in our brain. And there's three gateways to get up to that. We don't just magically like, hey, go innovate. Well, it doesn't work like that, right? Or if we're experiencing a stressor to us, that's a stressor
Mm.
that takes us to fight, flight, freeze, no matter how other people judge it. The color blue can be a fight, flight, freeze event. Then we're stuck in fight, flight, freeze. We can't go be resilient. Sometimes can't even be compliant because our nervous system has taken over. And we're in fight,
Yeah.
flight, freeze, not flight, flight, freeze, get over it and feel better and do what your dad told you to, but
Yeah.
fight, flight,
Yeah.
freeze.
Yeah.
And that really primitive state, adrenaline's pumping, cortisol's pumping, and our body's kind of taken over.
Yeah.
And sometimes for kids, especially young women, but boys too, it's quiet. We don't see it. So they're experiencing fight, flight, freeze in the classroom,
Yeah.
right? And it doesn't maybe show up, but their bodies are, for whatever reason, freaked out. And let me tell a quick story because I think that'll make it more clear. Um, Imagine we go into a coffee shop, and coffee shops, you got the espresso machine, milk frothing, making noise. There's usually some kind of moody music on. People are chatting, ordering food. There's smells. People are going in and out of the bathroom. There's difference in temperature. There's lots of textures. You and I can filter that out. So we're probably filtered on how do I navigate to the line and what am I going to order and how am I going to pay for that. Like we've got a process in our mind that we can handle that, and all those senses coming up through our spinal cord, we're able to filter and make choices on. What's interesting is for a lot of kids in the autism spectrum, adults too, there's no filter. So all of that's coming in at once. And so we could get really judgy about a kid going into a coffee shop going, just get over it. What's the big deal? Well,
Yeah.
the big deal is I could not imagine taking all that on at once. It's kind of maddening to imagine. And that's exactly what happens. And so they go to fight, flight, freeze because in that
Yeah.
moment they don't have that skill. Um, after that fight, flight, freeze, primitive brain state, and primitive brain is very important, keeps our heart beating,
Yeah.
keeps us breathing, but it's
Yeah.
doing its job. Then we get to the limbic system, right, which is where emotion lives, and actually a lot of decision making happens. And it's interesting because our notion of language doesn't totally exist in the limbic system, right? But we make a lot of decisions from there, and it's the emotional regulatory place. That's sort of the next phase gate, and then we can get to collaboration, problem solving, coping, imagination, creativity, all those amazing things where
Yeah.
we thrive and people are doing great.
Yeah.
But if we're stuck in the bottom two, and we all get stuck in the bottom two, even if you're neurotypical, there's stressors and things in our lives that get us stuck
Yeah.
there. we can't thrive. And so for kids who struggle in classes, for adults who struggle in life, we're very likely in those quote unquote lower states. And until we have the skills to get past that,
Yeah.
that's where we're going to live, right? That's where our
Yeah.
energy is. And that was the super big aha for me. And so many little stories with my son blasting through those and building all those neural pathways up so you don't have to stay
Mm.
stuck. But a lot of it is the empathy and understanding. If someone's not doing well, they do not want to be there. And so letting go of they're doing this to me.
Yeah.
They're doing this to spite me. All that kind of noise, that doesn't
Yeah.
serve anyone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's so much. I love the nuance that's brought into the conversation. And I think the last several years have been so enlightening for me to just play in the world of just starting with your response to what I shared about compliance and adherence. And I love the
Yeah.
nuance that you brought to it, that there's always a time and place for, most things.
Yes.
And we often come from a space of like one way or the other.
Yeah.
And, I love the light that you brought to it, because my intention wasn't necessarily to say that compliance was bad, but it is
Right.
to say that there's a time and place for it. And I love the nuance that you brought to it. And it goes with what you just said, this idea that you said having flexibility with a neurodivergent son. And I wrote, realizing when your approach isn't working.
Yeah.
Everyone is different. And to me, the best leader is not the one who says, I've got one way to lead people, and you're going to have to fit that mold, or it's just not going to work. The
Yeah.
best leader is like, okay, yes, I've got my vision, I've got my values, I've got the standard, I've got all that. And
Sure.
how do I need to they best understand it, and
Yeah.
so that they best understand it, and they're able to then do what it is that I'm asking them to do for what we're trying to create. But if
Yeah.
it's like the my way or the highway approach, then that usually is probably not a long-term sustainable and happiness and fulfilling inducing, perspective.
Right. 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 It absolutely does not build up resilience. So if you're wanting your team to perform well and do better than you and better than expected, yeah, the command control is not going to get you there. It's simple and it can be our go-to and it can be what we learned from our parents or family of origin. But you said so eloquently in the beginning, coming from a place of service, like how do I set this person up for a win? Is
Yeah,
such a better and more useful energy than why are they doing this to me or why aren't they performing? Like, who cares?
yeah,
Like, how do I set them up for a win? And how do I get that
yeah,
place of service? And then the weight's off your shoulders. Like, you set someone up for a win, the innovation they're going to do, the ideas they're going to have, kid or someone that works for you, are off the
yeah,
charts. Like, you will be very
yeah,
surprised at the amazing solutions that come.
yeah.
Happy to tell a story on that if that's all right.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing
Yeah.
before you share that. Just what you just said. When we say setting somebody else up for a win, when that person they work for you, they're part of your team, they're a child of yours, they're a partner. When they win, you win
Oh, yeah.
because it's a we. And so it's
Right.
like, assuming they're part of your family, organization, whatever it might be, recognizing, okay, anything I can do to empower this individual, anything to make them perform better, be more empowered, whatever it might be, is
Mm,
just winning for everybody.
yeah.
And so with that in mind, you mentioned these miracle stories by understanding how the brain works, and you were also going to
Yeah.
share, maybe that was overlapping. Would love to hear any stories
Yeah,
that
yeah,
resonate with you to share.
sure, sure. So I was very much into command control as a parent. I loved my kiddos. I wasn't mean, never abused or anything like that. But it was very much do this or else, and then we'll do rewards charts and then timeouts and all of that. That's kind of the go-to with most parenting. And so that didn't work. And the experience I would have picking my son up from school, first, second grader, had a long commute, so I was tired, need to go to the bathroom, hungry, so I'm not in my best state.
Yeah,
Kiddo hops in the car. He's tired from school, had a hard day. And I want to know how his day went. I want to connect with him. And I also want to kind of hear what happened. And, I would get the one word answer, I don't know, or recess was fun. Or because of his autism, he would mix stories that you or I would call fantasy, which were very real to him, with
yeah,
reality. So there'd be like Thor in the classroom and Hulk in the classroom. I'm not proud of this, but I would go to, and internally, you're lying. Why are you doing this to me? I work so hard. Like that's the noise I was coming with.
yeah,
And then I would get upset and there'd be a blow up and no one, no one won from that. Even if it was a quiet blow up, right? It's just bad energy. I learned from, and by the way, it's Dr. Stuart Ablon from Harvard, Dr. Ross Green, Dr. Bruce Perry. It's their work that I learned from and just applied. Right, I'm
Yeah.
not the brain scientist. I just know brain scientists that know
Yeah.
this work. What I applied was micro doses of empathy, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But empathy and validation. So starting there, I wasn't agreeing with him. I wasn't validating that Thor's in the classroom. I was saying, oh, that Thor's in the classroom. What's that like for you? Right. And so
Mm.
meeting him where he's at,
Yeah.
validating where he's at, listening to him. Right. So did that. And, it felt squishy to me. It felt like, well, I'm not in control. What's collaboration? I'm the parent, I'm in charge. But I was stuck. I was desperate. I didn't want to overload him with meds only. I'd done all sorts of other therapies with him, and things just weren't moving as well. I'm like, I'll try this. It's how the brain works. I like science. Tried it. And so I'd say 6 weeks after that, same routine, going to pick him up. It was first grade, now that I remember, the car line, waiting in the car line, trying to not get annoyed at all the cars and the commute. And yes, I need to go to the bathroom. Yes, I was still hungry. So all that was going on. I'm human. Hops in the car, and it still brings tears to me to this day. So he said, "Hey, Dad,
Mm.
I was wondering," in this little first grade voice, "could I just tell you like a big story, and then I'll tell you about how my day went?" Now, for those that don't know, in the autism world, it's very normal that fantasy and reality overlap. Those parts of the brain are very neuroplastic. And to be able to separate those takes usually decades of therapy and lots of work and structure that doesn't exist. He just
Mm.
created it. It was like a huge aha. And so, like, yeah, sure. So he would tell me a story which had a beginning and end. So I had a structure, which was insanely amazing. For any first grader, but especially a neuro diverse one.
Yeah.
He'd tell the story, and there'd be Thor, and it'd be all this stuff, and then he'd tell me what you and I would probably say happened in a day. I went to the class, I did this, I did that, and he started having recall that he didn't have before because it was all merged up with all this stuff. And if you're remembering a story that's got Thor and it's scary and all that, like you don't want to really live that when you're taking a math test, right? Or
Yeah.
or writing English. It's like, what? I just want to do the thing.
Yeah.
So he's done that since first grade consistently. And to this day, he's in high school now. He'll hop in the car and he doesn't necessarily need to tell me the big story anymore, but he'll tell me about his day with full recall about what happened. And he's honest about it. Like, Dad, I blew it in math. I was goofing off. I'm like, okay. And I've gotten to a place where I'm just empathetic and there with him, and there's not a consequence about that. He's just expressing what happened and being true to that. And like, I mean, what courage does that take to tell your parent, I goofed off in math?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the magic there is he started to self-regulate more. I started to self-regulate more. I'm not in fight, flight, freeze myself as a pissed off parent. And then I'm figuring out, okay, how do we create solutions that work for you? Like, what are your ideas, Cooper? You talked about that with adherence, the agreement part. What are your ideas to make this better? And building up that problem solving energy literally lights different neural pathways in our brain and lays those tracks down. So when those events happen, there's a different pattern. Like there's literally different neurons that are firing and pathways that are firing instead of these fear-based ones or these scared ones or overwhelm. And they can have access to their cerebral cortex and they can thrive. I mean, it's
Yeah.
absolute magic. And it's so simple that little microdoses of empathy and validation, and then after a time asking, hey, what are your ideas? Or they just pop in the car like my son did. Here's my idea. Can we try it? Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's worked miracles, Dr. Sage.
Yeah.
It seems so simple. And maybe my male energy is like, what do you mean empathy and validation? Like, "Urgh."
Yeah.
But that's what works. And
Yeah.
it's been working like magic. And it's a blessing to me. I don't have to carry all this stuff on my shoulders.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun existence.
Yeah.
And the ideas people come up with, like people are really, really creative given the chance. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. Yes, Chris, first of all, thank you so much for the courage to be authentic and be vulnerable and to open up about some
Yeah.
things that can be really hard. And one thing that you did that I think is so beautiful that I encourage all of our listeners to open up to, you recognized in the moment, there you were getting in the car and your son was, sharing certain things. And in your mind, at least at the time, it's like, what are you talking about? That didn't happen. Like, why are you
Right.
doing that? The lying energy, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And you made this decision. Well, whatever I've been doing, however I've been approaching this, it's not working. It's
Right.
not getting the result that I'm wanting. I don't have the, let's say, the relationship that I want with my son, etc. And you decided I'm going to take a different approach. And then I like how I like science, me too. And when we come from that space, it's like, okay, what are people doing out there who are getting the result that I would like to get? And in this
Yeah.
situation, the empathy, the validation, and you just started creating these miraculous shifts, and your son started showing up differently. And I think it was a Jordan Peterson interview I was listening to, and he said something like, and he was like tearing up as he said this because he was saying it's astonishing to him and a little bit disheartening how big of a difference a little bit of acknowledgement and encouragement makes a difference for people, because
Absolutely.
the disheartening part for him was that it was seemingly so little of encouragement, but they
Yeah.
were starving for it so much that it made the biggest difference and they opened up. But there's
Yeah.
so much hope there because it shows that when you come from that space of encouragement, of acknowledgement, you sprinkle in, like you said, the empathy and the validation at the right moment, you open up. Like instead of you just saying, that didn't happen, it was, oh, well, what was that like for you? Or what does that mean to you? And it just
Yeah.
opened it up. And then he started showing up differently. And so, all of our listeners, you can start just checking in with yourself. Is the approach I'm using working? And you know
Yeah.
it is or it's not because you're getting the result that you want or you're not. And if you're not, more of the stubborn approach, this isn't working. Let me double, triple, quadruple down on
Right.
doing what I've been doing. Maybe then
Yeah.
it'll work, like brute force my way through. Most of the time, that, I mean, that again, there might be a moment where that works, but the bulk majority of the time it doesn't. And
Right.
so are you willing to have the courage to say, my way is a way, not the way? That's a powerful distinction I share with people all the time. And because
Mm.
my way is a way, and in this situation, my way is not working,
Yeah.
maybe I can look for another way. And so with that in mind, if you could please, because we're talking about empathy, can you
Yeah.
speak to the relationship, excuse me, between empathy and leadership, both in parenting and business,
Yeah.
and why that's so important?
Yeah. It's important for so many reasons. One, you're coming from a place of service. Like, how do I set this
Mm,
person up for a win? And really, the result I'm after is I- I've seen these little pops where people just have these brilliant moments and these ideas like I would never imagine, and they're incredibly creative and super effective and on target, would never show up, right? And so I want to see more of these pops. The world needs more solutions out there. So that's what personally motivates me, and I think other leaders when they do this. The role empathy plays is, and it's a specific kind of empathy. So you're not feeling sorry. This is not sympathy. We're not feeling
mm,
sorry for someone. We're not disempowering them. Oh, poor pitiful you. I'm so sorry that happened. I mean, I don't need to make light of sympathy. It's very important, when someone has a loss of life and those kind of things. But empathy is different, and we're not agreeing with them. So I might not
mm,
like what's going on, and that's okay. And so that's like a relief for people. Like, oh, okay, I don't need to like it, but I'm meeting them where they're at, and specifically the craft of doing this after. Let's say there's a blow up at work. Someone blows up in your meeting. It's undesirable behavior. Um, we could make it about, let's put on a performance plan. That's not appropriate behavior. Blah 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 blah. Right? That's the kind of go to. Or later, I could say, "Hey, Chris, seems like that meeting was hard. What's up?" Now, the setup there is really subtle but different. I'm not talking about my behavior. I'm not talking about anything else other than it seemed hard for you in this time period. So I'm not confronting them, because if I confront and say, your behavior sucked, blah, 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 what are you going to do about it? Now I'm on the defensive. Like, all my gears up. I'm not in my best state, but I've given them a chance to tell me what's going on, which I might not know.
yeah,
And it could be they were triggered by something. It could be they had this incredible work idea and no one's listened to them for decades. It could be they have no way to fix it and they don't have the voice to get that out there, which I found more times than not. A lot of folks that at work are frustrated or upset is they've got solutions no one's listening to or implementing. And if they did, then we wouldn't have to have these meetings anymore.
yeah,
Right? Or it's the fifth meeting they've had on this week, and they're tired of complaining. Or it could be a personal thing going on in their life, and that they're not able to perform at their best and need a little support.
yeah,
But that little dose of empathy and then validation is important too. So I'm validating that it makes sense for them. Again, I'm not agreeing. And that's what's so powerful. Like, I don't have to like or agree at all what's going on for them. I don't have to like that they got upset in the meeting and dropped the F bomb or whatever it was. But I could say, oh, I get it. That makes sense for you that you would feel that way. Like, oh, I'm seen and heard and not alone anymore. Huh. I'm out of fight, flight, freeze now. That's now diffused. And then over time, I don't do this all at once. So a lot of folks race to the finish line and let's get done and get the result. I'm like, no, just do empathy and validation, a lot of that, like weeks
Mm,
of that.
yeah.
But over time, then I ask, like, okay, can I tell you my concern? So there's the adherence, like joining part. My concern is some folks in a meeting might be afraid if there's a blow up. Again, I'm not putting the load on them, like, you suck. How do we solve for that? Like, oh, well, here's 7 different ways that I would come up with to handle that. And they're going to be creative ways. Like, would it be okay that I step out of the room when that happens? Is it okay if I go off camera and maybe I have a squeezed doll or scream in my mouth? All kinds of things people will come up with to solve that I wouldn't have thought of, right?
Mm,
Or could I just, instead of going to this meeting, prototype on this idea I'm really excited about and show you a solution next time?
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that's so different than the go-to of, we're going to put you on a performance improvement plan and you can't ever have an outburst ever or be human, because we don't like humans. We want robots, right? So
Yeah.
total different energy. There is a time and place to do that. You still have your expectations. It's not about wavering on what matters to you. You have your expectations and your principles and your beliefs. Um, but you're really focused on, there's got to be something in the way for this person to succeed. And as a leader, I want to help them get there.
Yeah.
Now, the magic in that, and I've done this in the real world. It's not some squishy make believe thing I wrote on the whiteboard and sounds good. I've done it, and it's been sloppy sometimes and messy. And even if you do it like poorly, it produces results. Like, even if you're at
Yeah.
10% efficacy in this. So, a real world example, was let go from a job I was at for 10 years, reduction in force. And my entire team reached out after that and said, we want to have a Zoom call with you. I'm like, okay, great. And so they scheduled a Zoom call with me, all of my directs, didn't ask them to, no command control here. I had left, good terms, nothing bad to say about the company or anyone. Just timing is what it was and financials were they were. They scheduled a 1 hour Zoom call with me. They went to 90 minutes, and all they wanted to do is thank me for setting them up for a win. And
Mm,
I say this with a lot of humble. I was like blown away. This has never happened in my career, but it reached them, and they were
yeah.
excited. And that team did things that technical teams aren't supposed to be able to do at the speed. I They launched a chat bot that was stuck for 4 years and all sorts of regulatory and technical issues in 2 weeks. They fixed a customer service problem that was going to cost $11 million with under $1 million. They
Wow.
fixed a data visualization problem, reporting and analytics and stuff for a complex environment that was totally stuck, and turn it on its head for like a third of the cost and beat the time. I mean, there's like real world tangible things here. It's not just a squishy
Yeah.
make people feel good, which in and of
Oh,
itself does matter, but the results and the outcomes were significant. And
yeah.
people are like, well, how is that happening? Empathy, validation, build up their problem solving skills. And it
Yeah.
works every single time.
There is so much leadership gold in what you just shared, Chris, and it reminds me of there's a quote. My understanding is excuse me, it's an old African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go
Yeah.
far, go together.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things I wrote down here. First is a distinction I share with my clients all the time. In any relationship, I often share in an intimate relationship, but it applies in business as well.
Yeah.
Are you coming at this experience, this person, this situation from it's you versus me, like
Mm,
I'm right, you're wrong, or is it
mm,
you and me versus the problem?
yeah.
If it's you
Yeah.
and me versus the problem, that's when you show up with the empathy. And like you
Right.
just said, there's a difference between, hey, pointing the finger, like you did this, that's not okay,
Right.
versus, hey, here's what I noticed. What was that like for you?
Right.
And then they might say, well, like this happened, this happened, this happened. And
Yeah.
just by you, there's an old, I think it's Stephen Covey, first seek to understand before you seek to be understood.
Yeah.
And just by opening up and listening first, before you make the assumption about the other person and their intention and why they did what they did, I
Yeah.
come from a space that all behavior makes sense given the thinking a person has in the moment that appears real to them.
Mm,
So nobody acts in a way that's counter to whatever they're believing in the moment is like appropriate.
interesting.
Like you said, they might have gotten triggered. It might be unconscious. There might just be a reaction. But even that, that was an appropriate reaction
Yeah,
given wherever they were coming from. It's not appropriate in the moment, like with other
sure.
people, but in just in the context of them in isolation, all
Yeah,
behavior makes sense when you understand where the person's coming from, how they're experiencing the situation.
right.
It doesn't condone the behavior, it doesn't
No,
justify it, none of that. But if you seek to understand first, if it's you and me versus the problem, then I love how you worded it. Hey, can I tell you my concern?
right.
A, B, and C seems to have been what gone on in that situation. Other people are involved. Given that we're trying to create, let's say, the well-oiled machine here, given that we're trying to create a
Yeah,
team that's very coherent and we have a good teamwork and all these kind of things, there's certain issues that are going to get in the way of that. How do
right.
you think we can remedy this going forward? And then you involve them in the creation of the solution, which is that the idea I brought up earlier, and just it's brilliant when you shared it. And so I love the idea that of course you can still enforce your boundaries, you still have your standards. Sometimes you have people that, for whatever the reason, maybe they're going through something, or maybe they're just reacting or showing up in a way that's not appropriate. You have
Yeah,
your boundaries. Some things are not okay in the environment
right.
that you set up. And either, it might be severe enough that it's like that's not okay and they're gone, or it might be more of a, hey, maybe you weren't aware. This is the level we play at. This is the standard. This is what is
Yeah,
okay and what's not okay. These are the reasons why. Can we make that work going forward? And if they go
right.
yes, but then they keep doing the same old behavior, of course, there's certain things. I remember hearing
Sure.
Tony Robbins say from a business perspective, in business, it's not who you hire that destroys you, it's who you don't fire. And this
Yeah,
idea that you might
sure.
keep people around far longer, right? So of course,
Oh
there's
yeah,
boundaries, there's standards. And with that all in mind, I've seen just so much magic similar to what you've shared show up with the energy. It's you and me versus the problem. There's a collaborative approach of how can we solve this? And
yeah,
remembering people are not their behavior.
right,
If the person is the behavior, that means they're the problem. And if they're the problem, they can't be fixed. If they're the problem, they have to be
right.
removed. But if the
Right.
behavior is the problem, behaviors can be changed. So
Yeah,
I can respect the person, I can love the person, I can have empathy for the person, and then we can make the request of, well, this is what the situation needs to be. How can we make
right.
that work? And then if they're willing to alter that behavior, which is often more likely the case once they feel, like you said, understood and acknowledged and appreciated and heard,
Yeah,
now they're like, wow, like my leader here, my boss, my whatever, they get me. And like
yeah.
I appreciate that maybe I feel valued. I feel like an important part
Oh,
of
totally.
the team here, and I'm more willing to change now. It's like you're going to, whether you're leading in a family or whether you're leading at work, this
Yeah,
approach is going to be your best bet. Does it work every time? No, because either you're not going to approach it in the quote unquote right way, or they're not in
right,
a space to receive it. But
right.
either way, the more you practice it, the less conflict you're going to have, the more, miracles you're going to be able to create and experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, as you're saying that too, the other thing I'm remembering is how contagious it was. So
Mm.
I did make effort to teach my team, like, look, I learned this. I think it's useful. If you think it's useful, great. Want to use it. If you don't, it's okay. It wasn't like an edict, but I explained to them what I learned and how the brain works and how to use empathy in that. And so what was interesting is very unlikely suspects started supporting each other. So I had a bunch of engineers. Engineers can have big personalities and can be passive aggressive and a variety of other things. There's some behavior patterns that you'll know that are common for software engineers. And other folks were a little bit more like bold and brassy, bull in the china shop type approach. They started looking out for each other. They knew each other's triggers in certain environments that would happen, and they would start helping set each other up for a win. It was really
Yeah.
interesting. So it's super contagious. People actually loved this approach given the chance, and they started looking out for each other. Like, Mike, I know you're going to blow up in that meeting. Let me cover it for you.
Mm.
And it was insane. The group started yelling. I did not expect this when I was just telling them to tell it. So they had this skill, just honestly, just out of love, right? We don't use that term in traditional work, but really it was out of love. How do I serve these people? I learned this
Yeah.
amazing thing. I would love for others to know it. And it caught on like crazy. And they started doing it with other teams. We started doing it with customers, right? It
Yeah.
just whoop, it was
Yeah.
contagious. But slight shift here. It was kind of funny. You're in front of a door, and I have a story, and one of the skills I teach is called out the front door. So it's
Yeah.
poetically funny that you're in front of a door.
Yeah.
And part of this is, how do we communicate fully? Like a lot of times when I ask for something at work, I think I've asked for something, right? I think I've asked for, hey team, I need you to build this thing, go. And what I said was garbly gook, mushy mush. I drew a picture. Why don't you see it? Right?
Yep.
If you
Yeah.
like played
Yeah.
a recording, I'm like, holy crap, that's what I actually said. And I'm visual, so that's a miss for me a lot. I've drawn a picture, and I wish I could Vulcan mind meld it to you, but I'm having to use words. So out the front door is a framework that I learned from somewhere else. All the stuff I learned from out there was, it's observation, out, thought, feeling, and desire out the front door. And it's four things like a door, so it's an easy mnemonic.
Yeah.
Observation is just what three or four people would say they observed, right? A leaf fell from the tree. Hey, it looks like a leaf fell from the tree. Thought is kind of what you made up about it. We all make things up about it. I made up that you threw a ball in the tree and knocked the leaf down, and we're destroying my tree. And my feeling is I'm sad or upset about that. And my desire is to understand what's going on and not have you hurt my tree. I mean, whatever that is. And it's such a more visible way of communicating. And it's
Yeah.
very useful in the workplace too, not just in personal things, but you
Yeah.
know, um, if I'm laying out what I'd love my team to do and what the goal is and kind of what we're after, if I use those four components out the front door, I'm way more likely for folks to be engaged and to understand. And I'm fully showing up. And it's okay to mention feelings at work. Like I could say, I'm feeling really frustrated because we missed this date and or missed this timeline, and I'm embarrassed about it. And it's okay to be that vulnerable with your team appropriately. They're not your counselor,
Yeah.
but just that simple mnemonic out the front door, and you're in front of a door,
Yeah.
is so useful. And there's lots of little tools like that. Like you said, it's these little tiny things that make the shift. It's not, you don't have to change your whole self. It's
Yeah.
a couple tools, a couple approaches, come from service, and watch the show.
Yeah. 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 There's a book that I read years ago that I think is a masterclass in what we're talking about. And for everyone who's listening, and if you're wanting the recommendation, it's called Nonviolent Communication by a gentleman named Marshall Rosenberg.
Mm,
Beautiful book, really simple and really easy to read. Transformational when it comes to your communication. You want to up level your leadership, start with your
yeah.
communication. That book is phenomenal. And given what you said earlier, for our listeners who might be potentially resistant or doubting aspects of what we're saying, there's a distinction in business between soft skills and hard skills.
Mm,
So a hard skill might be something like your marketing or your sales and things like that, things that seem to be more concrete. A soft skill might be your empathy, your communication.
right.
And some of us will get into a habit or a habit of thinking that only the hard skills matter
Right.
or that they're more valuable. The thing is, without the soft skills, the hard skills don't work.
Right.
And so, like Chris said earlier, with some of these real world examples, by mastering the quote unquote soft skill of like being a masterful communicator, the $11 million problem got fixed in $1 million.
Right.
So $10 million got saved as a result of knowing this.
Yep.
In an example of a parenting, the shift that you experienced in the car with your son of the soft skill of being willing to shift your approach, listen differently, be more curious, etc. That potentially shifted, saved, improved your relationship with your son, whatever the word we're going to use.
Yeah.
And it goes such a long way. And you talked about this example of these two people, these engineers, and one saying, "Hey, Matt, I know you're going to probably blow up in that meeting, so I'll take over." And
Yeah.
then you think, okay, what is the effect of, in that example, Matt shows up to the meeting and Matt blows up with a potential customer, client, and or a group of people, whatever it might be. Let's say that
Yep.
were to happen. What are the consequences and the costs of that financially, emotionally, mentally, etc.,
Right.
relationally? And when you realize, wow, it is costing me a ton of money to not know these things.
Yeah.
And then so it's like it's so simple when you recognize It's like from a, neurological perspective, let's say the brain is really good at understanding what it's going to lose when it makes a
Mm,
change, but
mm,
it's not that good at understanding what it's going to gain,
right,
because what we're going to gain is more theoretical at best. So if I were to tell you, hey, you should change, the way you're communicating or showing up, if that way has worked for you to some degree,
right,
you might think, oh my God, I can't stop. This is what works.
right.
But when you realize what is available for you on the other side, when you master this new way of communicating, it's literally like an unlimited upside. You
Absolutely.
more money than you can imagine, less problems than you've ever had before, more group coherence in your team,
Yeah.
better,
Or
I
fun.
forgot, yeah, more fun. People actually want to be there, etc.
Yeah.
You actually enjoy it's amazing. And so with that in mind, I would love to make a little shift here. Given the parenting expertise that you have, what
Yeah.
have you found are the primary obstacles that are getting in the way of families thriving? Because I feel like
Wow.
that's such an important aspect to our conversation as well.
Wow, it's such a long list, and families specifically in Western U.S. culture is where I would have
Yeah,
expertise. Right, there's families
yeah,
around the
yeah.
world that are thriving. Um, Boy, so many things. Certainly, COVID had a massive impact on socialization and being out there for adults and for kids, and that's a wave that has been there for a while. Um, our go-to, and you said so well, is we're going to go to our family of origin. However we were treated, that's our go-to. There's not like a parenting handbook. As parents, we hate to be told how to parent. Like we're going to put up all kinds of walls. How dare you? Right? So we're not going to seek that out. There's no guidebook. It just happens. It's stressful being a parent, if we're being honest, right? When kiddos are born, maybe especially for males, like that didn't maybe have a lot of skills or came from a family of origin that wasn't caring, like what do I do, and this kid isn't sleeping and I'm exhausted and there's another dirty diaper. I mean, it's tough being a parent.
Mhm.
um so many things. One is, as I reflect on what you're saying, our reticular activating system, and I'm going to say this with lower fidelity than you might as a doctor, but it has these high repeat things, whether they're used for us or not. And the reticular activating system really is trying to keep the energy low in the brain. It's trying to conserve energy, and it's trying to replay what it knows out of safety as a survival instinct. So if you had a parenting technique that was abusive, it was hitting, it's all you know. As bad as that technique is, and there's all kinds of data around that, and I don't entertain ever hitting a child ever. I'm just going to hold the line there. I'm sorry. And I am a person of Christian faith, and I don't believe the spare the rod crap because it's detrimental. And I don't believe, from a Christian perspective, forgive me for a moment, that Christ would ever do that. He certainly didn't. So, that aside, sorry, got off on my pedestal. But if that's your go to, if that's what you experienced in life as a child, as bad as it is, your RAS is going to replay Chris was bad, hit him, right? I mean, it's time for a spanking. That's the thing. And we've got to undo our own RAS. We've got to get out of our own damn way. And we've got to look at what science shows us in addition to our faith and other things, to do that. So for families right now, all kinds of pressures. You've got professional social media actors, I'll call them, getting you addicted with dopamine hits to the scroll. And most folks listening to this probably have a cell phone and probably are guilty of the scroll, if we're being honest. And I just blew 30 minutes. What happened? Right. So that's an issue, right? We're by ourselves, we're getting dopamine hits, and we're buying those products and services that they're hitting us and feeding us quickly. That's not a super useful thing to build a community and a family. There are pressures that have not been present in the US in some time. There are massive financial pressures. Housing costs have gone up. I just read this morning, nearly 50% in the last 4 years. Wages have gone up 13%. So there's pressure, there's financial pressure on how do I get ahead and make even and get out of debt. Um, the stuff that's happening with school shootings and things in schools that we would never imagine as kids, as hard as it
Yeah.
was, all kinds of pressures on a family. So the go-to, these are like fight, flight, freeze kind of events coming at us, and we've got to choose to, how do I do something different than fight, flight, freeze? How do I do something different that's in my high repeat thing? How do I find solutions that work for my family? How do I deal with it? We've got to have two or three jobs and someone else is caring for my kiddo, right? How do I do that? That's an unnatural thing, right? If you look at other animals, is giving up our kid for someone else to take care of. I'm not talking about a tribe, but let me give this to a neighboring monkey tribe to take care of my little monkey while I go do some monkey things and then come back. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, boy, so many pressures. It's so hard. But I would say, as much as we can get to empathy and validation and being honest with each other, what's going on, and realizing our kiddos do not have a fully formed 25-year-old adult brain. They have a beautiful 8-year-old brain. They don't yet have the coping mechanisms. So please don't put the adult filter on them. They're kids. It's okay. They're going to screw up. They're going to make what we would call silly mistakes. They're still learning. Let's not put an adult expectation on that. All right. It's okay that they goofed off and they screwed around in class once. It's not the end of the world. But it's so hard to answer that question, but I also have so much hope because the science around this is better known than it ever was. Folks are more aware, maybe because of the pressure, that we've got to do something different, that what we've done for decades doesn't work. The kids should not be, seen or heard. Like, that's just really, that's our go-to. And then realizing these are the kids that are going to take care of us when we're in an old folks home, later. Like, oh, how would I treat the person that I know is going to take care of me when I'm old?
Mm.
Versus behave and live in this box and do the things I want you to do. Like, this is the person that's probably caring for me later. Huh.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
not literally that kid, another one's kid, right, is going to be your
Yeah.
caregiver. So yeah, I really encourage folks to look at science, to look at things other than just Western medicine and throwing pills at the solution, because sometimes that is a thing you need to do. But there are other options out there that will get your body chemistry in balance and get you healed and cured. Try some things that are out of your zone that might feel a little bit woo. Try rhythmic breathing. Try a tantric thing. Like, it's not going to hurt you. You won't be
Yeah.
converted to something you don't like, but you might just find, like, out of your zone, there's a few things that help you cope, that serve you, and it doesn't have to be like anyone else.
Yeah.
It's your blueprint for making your life and your family successful, and having that courage to try those things outside of your zone, I think, is what's going to, I know actually, what's going to build your brain and what's going to build your resilience and you enjoying life that much more.
Mm. Yeah. There's a lot in there.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, 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 no. It's beautiful. No, no. I'm happy that there was so much in there. I love, you started by saying that there's no rule book, there's no handbook. Like, nobody knows. There's not like a right way to do it.
Mm-mm.
And so, I remember a mentor of mine saying when his wife was pregnant and then they were getting ready for their first child, he kept reaching out to all of these people that he knew
Yeah.
who had kids. And he was saying, what's the best way to do this? And what's the best way to do that? And he recognized that he was getting opinions that were like completely opposed to each other.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And he read this study, which is so interesting. And it showed that the amount of books on parenting that you buy
Yeah.
is directly related to essentially how good of a job you do as a parent,
Wow.
whether or not you read those books.
Because you have an
Because
intent, you want
the
to do it right.
exactly, yeah, the intention is there. Now you can
Nice.
substitute books for, like, conversations that you have, videos that you watch, a podcast like this. The
Sure.
idea is, if you're the type of person who's showing up from a space of, how can I do this as effectively as possible? I really want to do this
Yeah.
well. I remember, to be playful about it, my mom tells a story that when my sister and I were young, maybe, like, she's 3 years younger than me, and so maybe it was like, 5 and 2 or something.
Yeah.
She was hanging out with her best friend, and we were really close to her family, and they had a son who was a year younger than me. And she was basically saying to her, we can really, like, and I'm not gonna say the word, but she's like, we can really F these kids up.
Yeah.
And they both, like, kind of laughed about it, but it was like, yeah, it's important that we're very mindful and aware of what are we, teaching them, what are we exposing them to, etc. And
Right.
this idea that, can we have, there's a bunch of things that you shared. Can we have first the humility and the self-awareness to say, okay, going back to what I said before, my way's a way, not the way. So
Yeah.
there's things that I know and there's things that I don't know.
Yeah.
There's much more that I don't know than I do know. Now, can I have first a self-awareness to say, is the way that I'm doing things, or is the way that me and my partner are doing things, is it working?
Mm,
Are we really happy with our family environment? And are we actually thriving by your own
right.
definition of whatever that means?
Right.
If you're thriving, then it's working for you.
Yep.
Whatever you're doing, if your kids are doing really well, and by your own, like, let's say, and there is your own definition, and there's also more of like a societal definition. But like, if we come from the space of there's a level of your kids emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, like they're doing well, and
Yeah.
they're just growing in a beautiful way. You're guiding them
Yeah.
in a really well way, and your household is working the way you want it to. Beautiful. But if
Yep.
it's not, are you willing to have the perspective and the humility to say, you know what are other people doing that does seem to be working for them? Because there's people more than ever before, especially with podcasts and social media, there's people, excuse me, who will have a expertise in parenting and they share it, but it's not from a space of, because sometimes we get defensive, like you said, it's not like I'm a better parent than you. It's
Right. Right.
here's what I have found that works,
Yeah.
at least for me and certain people I share it with. Try it on. And I think of it like clothing. You go to a store, you
Yep.
try on a piece of clothing,
Right.
see how it fits, see how it
Yeah.
looks in the mirror, see how you feel wearing it. If you like it, buy it. If you don't, put it back. And
Right.
so maybe you read a book on parenting and there's 15 ideas, two of them really resonate, 12 and 13 of them don't.
Right.
Okay, but just you applying those two makes that book infinitely valuable to you. And so,
100%.
excuse me, so just coming from that space, that's the first thing. Then you mentioned this adult expectation, which I see all the time. I think it's so powerful because I've done this myself without meaning to. There was a in my previous relationship with my ex, I remember there was a child that we were exposed to, and this kid must have been maybe 5 years old or something like that.
Okay.
And I remember being annoyed with this child in the moment
Sure.
because the way the child was interacting with us, it was almost like we're trying to do something and this kid is
Right.
bothering us.
Right. Yeah.
and, and
Yeah.
and it's like, hey, we're trying to do something. Can you leave us alone while we do this? And this kid was not having that. And so it was like the more that I tried to resist this kid, the more he came at me. And it
Mm,
wasn't until I finally like recognized what I was doing. There's the old adage, whatever you resist persists. I
yeah.
started to completely let that go and accept what was going on and play with
Sure.
the kid, and everything worked out beautifully, and then the
Yeah.
kid moved on. But it's coming from that space of there I was 25 or something like that, coming from the mindset, why isn't this kid acting like an adult?
Mm,
Now that wasn't the wording, I wasn't consciously doing that, but
sure.
in hindsight that's what I was doing. And like you said, where are we expecting our 8-year-old or our 5-year-old to behave in a certain way, not realizing they're a child.
Right.
Children show up in a certain way. And
Yeah.
what if that was okay? And what if that was beautiful? And what if it's not they're the problem? What if your expectation is the problem?
Right. 100%.
And there's just a whole different way of being with it. And so, and the last thing before I throw it back to you, you mentioned maybe we were raised in a certain way. And so the
Yeah.
idea of, well, what was I exposed to based on how my parents maybe parented me, or
Yeah.
how my culture, my society parented me? And
Right.
where am I doing that to my child? And is it effective? Is it working? Just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's right.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's like, is this working for me? If it's not, am I open to another way? That doesn't make your family bad or wrong. It just means
Mm,
that's what they knew.
yeah.
And so, are you willing to be different? Just check in, keep the fingers on the pulse. Am I getting the results I want in any area of my life, health, relationship, business, etc.? If the answer
Yeah.
is no, your way is not working, at least right now. It
Yeah.
might work later, it might have worked in the past, but it's not
Yeah.
working now. And very often we find something that works to a certain degree and we just roll with it because
Yeah.
we're like afraid to let that go. But if it's not working to the degree that you would like, you only have two options essentially: change or keep it going. But if you
Hmm.
keep it going and it's not working, it's probably not magically going to get better. It's just going to keep not working. If you
Yeah.
change, you create the possibility of it working.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that popped in my head, there's so many little things in my head. It popped in my head as you're talking is it can be really easy as a parent to get caught up in comparison And there's
Mm,
like this soft competition that happens if we're being honest about parents. We're looking at other parents and kids. We're looking at how they dress and how they appear and how nice their house looks at. We just passed Halloween as we're recording this. Do they have all the right decorations? And like there could be a heavy influence on our look good with our family. Our kids look good, they're dressed well, they behave well. Look at us, look how successful we are. And behind that can be just like absolute rot of like there's no family, like this is all a show.
yeah.
It's Eminence Front from the Who song. It's kind of this thing that's put on. I play that music in my head sometimes, and it's easy to get caught up in. I've been caught up in it, right? We see other
Mm,
kids that show up, and gosh, look how well they're behaved, and how nice their backpack looks, and we're human. We take this stuff in, and we're
yeah.
comparers at heart, right?
Yeah.
But it's so important to let that crap go. And I'm not saying, your kid is I'm joking with this word, the hoodlum that runs around with their clothes off, and that's okay, right? I'm not going to that far, but getting so caught up in the look good, feel good. My house looks like the Restoration Hardware magazine. It's perfect, and we do all the little perfect things and all that. Now, I'll be the first to say there are all these little beautiful traditions and rituals that matter. I'm not saying get rid of that. So, going to the pumpkin patch and having that fun time, absolutely important. Having the perfect candy and the perfect costumes, who really cares?
Yeah.
What you'll remember is my kids had fun. We did a fun thing. We have an inside joke maybe about the event. Maybe one of us made a big mistake and we're able to laugh at it. Maybe I, as a dad, had this just absurd costume. Instead of getting upset that people laughed at me about it, just like laughing that off. I'm like, oh my God, that was the dumbest
Yeah.
costume ever. Why did
Yeah.
I go as the poo emoticon or whatever it was? But not getting so caught up in that, and it's really hard to do. We have a lot of comparison with social media and people posting, look at my perfect pumpkin and my perfect kid. And
Yeah. Yeah.
boy, as much as we can let go of it, it is so much more fun being a parent. And you know maybe your car's dirty and not perfectly clean. It's not about going to like not maintaining. I don't mean quite that far, but who really cares if your family and you are happy and you're functioning well? Who cares if you wore jeans that were dirty, one day, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about malnutrition. I'm not going all the way there. Like you got to do the
Yeah.
things to care for your kiddo and have food and routines, and that's important.
Mm,
But why am I using someone else's view of success as mine? It's so
yeah.
freeing. Now, I'm not able to always let go of that. I'll tell you the truth. Like when I go pick up my son from high school, I see other kids and like I'll see my brain going comparing and what are those parents doing? Like, whoa, 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 stop. Like, who
Yeah.
cares?
Yeah.
Right? Coop, my son's name's Cooper. Coop's happy. He's bouncing out. He's got his 9 friends he likes hanging out with, and they talk about what some might call nerdy things. I don't care. He's
Yeah.
happy. He's social. He's successful. He's having fun. He plays sports. He does what he does. Why am I using someone else's view of what my son should look like? It's
Yeah.
really interesting. You got to really push on that RAS and like, sorry, I know you're a prehistoric thing trying to make me survive, but I'm actually after something a little bit different. And let me give you some new, greatest hits to play.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
not like I want to look like everyone else. I want to feel different. And last thing I'll say, sorry, is flipping it to work a little bit. And you talked about the soft skills and hard skills. The engagement rate. There's a Gallup poll. It's really famous out there that the engagement rate's the lowest it's ever been, meaning employees are engaged and excited about being at work. It's at 30%.
Wow.
So, rough number here, but let's say there's 70% not showing up with all they have for work. Like, what would it be like just spending a little energy, it's free, on empathy and validation in this for that 30% to say even double to 60%? Right? What amazing things would they do
Yeah.
with what you already have? You don't need to buy anything. You don't need to buy an AI tool. You don't need to even hire new staff. Just doing that for a couple months. Like,
Yeah.
I know the answer. It's a loaded question, but
Yeah.
what would it hurt to go from
Yeah.
30% to even 40% engagement? That's a
Yeah.
massive gain. It's 1/3 more things done. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where you're saying like the EQ and the emotional intelligence. So I mean by EQ, it's like the oxygen for the fire. So if we're starving the fire, it's really interesting. We want fire, but there's no oxygen for it to burn. The EQ is like the oxygen. Like and the more oxygen you give it within realm, because you still need
Yeah.
wood and fire and all the things for the chemical reaction to happen. But the more oxygen you give it, the more fire you're going to have. And that
Yeah.
that emotional intelligence is the oxygen.
Yeah.
The hard result is the fire, right? That's the outcome, the product or the sale or the thing. But that fire dies with no oxygen.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to think about, if we use that Gallup poll, like you said, if it's 3 out of 10 of your people are like engaged and doing what they need to be doing, let's say,
Yep.
what is it worth to you if
Right.
you double that or you triple it and you almost get to, let's say, all of them? Now you have it's an exponential disproportionate output because if I am 2 to 3 times or more, let's say, engaged, fulfilled with the work,
Yeah.
excited about whatever it is we're doing,
Yeah.
I am going to bring so much more. Now, let's say you've got 5, 10, 100 people on your team or more. You're creating, it's almost like the graph of compounding interest, and you see how it just goes up exponentially over time. It's
Right.
like that, just so much faster. And all of a sudden you're saying, what's that worth to your bottom line? And when
Yeah.
you realize so much more than almost anything else you'd invest your time in. And like you said, it's for the most part, it's free. So you
Yeah.
sit there and you say, is this worth it? And then the other thing I wanted to speak to was there's a quote that you reminded me of. Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
If we come from a space of looking at in this case, we're talking about families, but it applies to anything. If I'm living in comparison, looking, oh my God, that person's got this car, this house, their family appears to be this way. First, like you said, appearances can be deceptive. And so it
Yeah.
can look a certain way on the surface, but be nothing like that in reality.
Right.
But in the other thing is, even if it is like amazing, good for them. But
Yeah.
what's
Right.
it like for you? And if it's
Right.
not like that for you, it's do you is the important thing in a
Yep.
way that works. And so what is the way of being that you and your family, it works for you, you're happy, things are flowing, and you're creating the result that you want,
Yeah.
regardless of how other people do it. It's important that you're doing it in a way that works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that in mind, would love to, from a job perspective, for our listeners who feel like they don't have much joy in what they
Mm.
do, how can we bring more joy into our work?
Wow. Yeah. You know, it's a hard question to answer because there's some things at work. I joke with my friends, like I didn't grow up with a IT auditor action figure, right? Our action figures when we were kids were mostly for boys, and I know this is it's generalist, right? But boys were supposed to like firefighters and police fighters, and for me, it was $6 Million Man and Fonzie and Knight Rider and Chips. I mean, those are the things, right? Those are the action figures. Now, I don't live any of those things out, and for women, it was different, and some of those same things too, right? And it crosses lines, and a lot of us are transgender and all that. I don't mean to speak illy of that, but just the action figures were certain things. The superheroes were certain things. Um, and then we're in these roles that are nothing like those superheroes, those things we loved as a kid, right? And it's not like there's theme music that plays for work when we show up. Sometimes there's a walk-on music when you give a speech, but it's not like the Untouchables or the Incredibles theme plays when you show up. So what can be interesting to play with here, and this might sound really silly, and I'm sorry if it does, but like, can you bring some of that childlike stuff appropriately into your work? And some of you already do. Like some folks are sharing memes. Be careful with the appropriateness in those, but some people are sharing memes. They'll have like on Friday mornings when we start our meetings, it's going to be old guys jokes, dad jokes, bad humor, bad puns, right? You'll start little. So there's little things you can do to bring a little bit of fun and a little bit of childlike play into your work to soften it up, to not make it so
Mm,
hard and dreary. You can gamify things too. I had a team that I say made the mistake. It was actually worked out for the best, but as a leader, sometimes you have to like give the announcements, the equivalent of when you get on an airplane, they tell you to fasten your seatbelt, where the exits are, and how the oxygen drops.
yeah.
You have to say it. And right, it's boring. After you've heard it once, it's really boring. And my team, I one time did this gamification thing where I kind of did it in a Jeopardy sort of thing. And there's tools to do this. And every time after that, they would only listen if I did it as a Jeopardy thing. Now,
Mm,
I've got to up my game as a leader a little bit. I can't be as sloppy and just like hear the five announcements. But a little bit of gamification, a little bit of fun, a little bit of silliness will soften up things quite a bit.
Yeah.
The empathy stuff we already talked about. And then, boy, when you do these offsites, doing them with intent. So many folks in their career have gone to offsites and we put post-its on a board
Mm.
and then we don't do any of the things we said. Right. And that
Yeah.
happens again and again and again. We get really excited about this offsite and boy, we're going to change the world, and all these ideas come out and people start talking. And then, the flip charts go back and maybe there's an email and one of the 10,000 things gets done. The first time you do this, people are like, okay, we're busy. The second time you do it, people start to get disheartened, rightfully so. Right. So I would say when you're doing those offsites or those meetings, be really clear what you are and aren't going to do. If you're really saying, like, this is just ideation, and I'm not really sure we can do any of these things, but I really actually do care and I want to encourage you, that's very different. And it's from a loving place and you're honoring people's contribution versus
Yeah.
let's just do it and there's no framework. So there's that. Meeting people where they're at, getting them involved in things as much as you can, step aside, right? And you as a leader, especially if you're going like from an individual contributor to a leader, at first you're going to be quote unquote better than the folks that report to you at the thing. I know it from a software development perspective. So if I was the number one coder and I'm promoted to a manager role, I'm still the number one coder. But my job is flipped to I now need to build up 15 number one coders. So we've got to let go of the thing and realize that, okay, at first they're not going to be quote unquote as good as we are. And that's okay. However, in short order, they're going to be way better than we are.
Yeah.
And it's letting go of having to have all the right answers, be the smartest person in the room. Um, Even as an individual contributor, that's sometimes important too. Letting go of that energy, and how do I build up other people, peers, or subordinates from a reporting perspective? How do I build people up? So that energy, a little bit of fun, and you already said like what's not working, and you might not want to take action on all those things that aren't working. That can be overwhelming, by the way. Like, holy
Yeah.
crap, all these things aren't working. Like, just pick one,
Yeah.
and work on that one, and then maybe another. You
Yeah.
don't have to do them all at once. Or if you need to take a pause, I'm like, I'm in overwhelm. Take a pause for a week. It's okay.
Yeah.
Breathe. Get your resilience back. But yeah, have fun at work. Like, seek to honestly, and I don't mean like goofing off or being in a way that's combative with what the company's trying to do, like be a practical
Yeah.
joker all the time. I have that energy, so I have to watch it. But bringing a little fun into work, that energy is important. Um, and when we can do that, it helps other people show up. That lightness, right? It's not so heavy. People start coming with ideas and they
Yeah.
start thinking a little differently. And there's some blind spots that pop out like, oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Um, Boy, if I would say one thing, it's bring just a little bit of fun, a little bit of gamification into your workplace.
Yeah. I love that. And there's something that came to mind when you shared, as a child, let's say with the different action figures, the superheroes, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, but we don't walk into work, let's say with the theme music.
Nope.
And the thing is, though, as a potential challenge for people, you
Yeah.
could. And this is what I
Absolutely.
mean. And this is what I mean by that. So from an NLP perspective, which is one of the aspects of psychology that I'm trained in,
Yep.
they talk about anchoring. And the
Yeah.
idea is that when an anchor, to keep it really simple, think of it like this: something happens, and then an anchor is essentially what have I associated with this thing? So
Yep.
when the thing is present, I feel a certain way. So
Yeah.
let's say you're feeling really fun or playful or exciting or bold or confident or really like grateful, whatever the feeling you want to like associate. And then you play a certain song when you're feeling that way.
Yeah.
And then you pause it. Okay. Then the next time you feel that same way, play that same song. You
Yeah.
do that a handful of times, and neurologically, your body associates that song with that feeling. And now
Yep.
let's say you're walking into work and you have your headphones in. I'm not suggesting the giant boombox, you got your headphones in and you're playing this quote unquote your theme song.
Yeah.
And as you're walking in, we've all experienced how music can shift us emotionally and mentally.
Totally.
You're in a certain headspace, heart space, you're not, glad about where you're at. You play a certain song, and very quickly it can shift you. It brings in the emotion, it moves the energy. And so now
Yeah.
imagine you anchor through several exposures. It's a stimulus response kind of idea. Feeling a
Yeah.
certain way that I want to feel, play the song. Keep doing that over and over again, the same song, and eventually that song actually causes the feeling.
Yeah.
And so now you can have your theme song, and then you could play it when you're going into work. You can play it when you're stepping into any experience that you
Yeah.
want to be in that state. And now you've got this theme song that puts you into a resourceful, decisive, joy-inducing, powerful, contributive state, whatever it might be. And that could bring so much fun depending on what the song is.
Yeah.
And again, anyone can do that. Many of our listeners won't, but if you do it, it's amazing what can happen. And
Yeah.
I've done that in the past. I have not done that consistently. And just as a result of this conversation, I'm very excited to start looking through my playlist and go, what's my new theme song?
I was going to ask you, do you have one in mind? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There used to be several that were some instrumental and some like very epic, and
Yeah.
some just more with words, more like kind of motivational, like workout kind of music. But it would really depend on what we're going for. But
Yeah.
with that in mind, and you can have different songs anchored to different emotional states. So just keep it in mind. It's a way to make it fun. It's a way to make it playful, and you can do that. And so as we begin to wrap up, Chris,
Yeah.
I always like to bring awareness to the purpose of this podcast. The purpose of my work is to help people create an extraordinary life without regret. For our audience listening, how would you advise people to do that?
Wow. It's a great question. I recently let go a bunch of stuff I was carrying around. So what comes to mind, and there's so many answers to that, honestly, but letting go of stuff in the past that we're holding on to. Like I
Mm,
sucked when I did that, and that was awful, and I need to pay for that for the rest of my life. No. Apologize for it, put a wrapper around it, get some help with that if you need to. But energetically, that's so holding us back. So, um, and if you've lived long enough, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have things you wish you didn't do, or you made up, stuff about it. And you don't need to have that on high repeat. It does you no good. And it's time to put it away. So I would say, do the work, and sometimes it's not a ton of work. You don't have to go to counseling for 20 years. With respect, it might be a few sessions. You might do something different. You might do ritual breathing. You might do a ceremony. You might have a culture that has a way of handling those things, but put them behind you.
yeah,
Live life as much as you can in the present and in the future. As you look to, as a family, you're always kind of thinking, yes, you want to be present, but you're also thinking, what's next? And how do I set my kiddo up, going forward? What actions do I take now? But yeah, let go of quote unquote bad things you've done, mistakes you've made. You already made them. They already happened. You don't need to keep making them.
I love that. That's such a wonderful answer. And yeah, so just as an inventory kind of check for everyone listening, slow down, check in with yourself, give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes, pick some time today. It could be when you're in the bathroom. It could be before you go to bed. It could be right when you wake up. Pull out the phone, notes section, and or on paper. What's in my life that doesn't belong here anymore? Now that can be people, that could be circumstances, but that could be internal things. Blame, shame, guilt. It could be emotions you've been carrying. And then either use the ways you already know, the tools you already know to help you let those go, and or seek out help. But when you come from that space, it's incredible. There's an old like Zen Buddhist kind of philosophy. A cup is best filled when it's empty. If I
Mm,
have a cup and it's filled with tea, I can't do anything with that cup anymore. It's like there's no more
right.
room. And so in
Right.
that same way, your life is potentially filled with a lot of things that don't belong there anymore.
Yeah.
What could be possible if you emptied that out and you made room? Another way of thinking about it from like a feng shui perspective, often we have a lot of clutter
Mm,
externally,
mm,
but we also have a lot of clutter internally, and we don't typically recognize that. When you do the decluttering externally, though, it actually benefits you internally. And when you do it internally, it benefits you externally because then you get motivated to do it.
mm,
But it's like, as anyone knows who's done this, if you have a desk or an office or a room or a car or a whatever that by your own estimation is a mess, and you take the time to clean that up, and now it actually feels spacious, it feels good.
Yeah.
It's incredible how you go mentally and emotionally. I feel so much better because
Yeah.
you've let go of what no longer serves you.
Yeah.
And I think we can all do that to varying degrees. And as a part two to that question, if our conversation right now was your last opportunity to share the message that's on your heart with our audience and with the world, if they would never hear from you again, what would you want to make sure you leave them with?
Ooh, wow. It's a big one. Yeah. What's coming to mind, what's most present is, and I'm visual, see yourself doing well. See yourself being whatever you call successful. See yourself happy, even if you're not right now. Like, see yourself in that state. Um, and but all sorts of things are going to come up. Well, that's not true. Blah blah blah. And like, just tell your little brain that's interesting. See yourself successful and happy. By successful, I don't mean like accomplishments. I make $1 million and I wear a nice suit and I have a, Ferrari or whatever. Like, see yourself happy and successful. That's what
Yeah.
I would recommend.
Mm, I love that. It reminds me of so Napoleon Hill, for our listeners who may not know, he wrote many books, but one of them that's likely the most famous is called Think and Grow Rich. And I think it was about 100 years ago or so he wrote it.
Yeah.
And it was a foundational book in the personal development space that so many books now are kind of copying it. And he talks about how everything is created twice, first in the
Mm.
mind and then in actuality. If everything starts as an idea. So when Chris says, see yourself already successful, already happy, when you start from that place, it's so much easier to create it because you're being it.
Mm.
It's a whole different experience. And so thank you for sharing that. And is there anything you're working on or towards now that's exciting you?
Wow. You've got all the good zingers at the end here. Exciting me. Hmm. But there's a lot of little things, nothing really like brainstaking, and I'm taking a break from writing books for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But boy, excited about creating. Yeah, actually my and I'm not trying to pitch my own YouTube channel at all, but like I have conversations with brilliant people like you, and that's grown a lot quicker than I expected.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a natural introvert, so that is a lot of fun and that's unexpected. So it's been fun to watch that grow and just see who it touches.
Yeah.
But I don't have anything
Yeah.
giant right now. It's just lots of little
Yeah.
things.
And I love that too, because I think there's a pressure that our listeners can put on themselves that whatever they're working on or doing, it has to be quote unquote big, or it's got
Yeah.
to be giant. When I love the idea that greatness is a bunch of small things done well over time.
Mm.
And like, there's really no such thing as the big thing or the small thing because it's relative.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's only big if it's big to us. And a bunch of small things can be big things. And so with
Right.
that in mind, in a moment, I want to give you a chance to say what that channel is because I've gotten to listen to your podcast and I've loved it. And I've also gotten to be a guest on it. And you and I, our episode released last week, and it was such a great conversation. I've gotten to listen to it several times, and people I've shared it with have talked about how it was. I thank you for that. And so, where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about you, figure out what you're up to, find out about your books, your YouTube channel, anything that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, yeah. I think some of this is going to be in show notes. So if you're
Yeah.
driving or working out or something, please don't hurt yourself. But my YouTube and podcast channel is Leading the Way, and there's about 7,000 Leading the Ways. When I named it, I wasn't like looking at everything. So the number one you will see is a evangelical Christian one that is not mine, and we'll have a link to it. And Leading the Way is all about what are the neuroscience evidence-based ways,
Mm,
um, it's science backed wherever we can to have success in the workplace, right? So, how does our brain work? How do we get solutions there? And some of them are going to be things that you don't expect. I've had everything from someone talking about the vagus nerve, right? And how we self regulate and how we show up with that to, our brilliant conversation to, I've also had lawyers on, like how to work with lawyers, and I've also had auditors on because
yeah.
those are things that come in. I'm like, ugh, I don't want to work with a lawyer. I want to just get through this, right? Lawyers or slime bags or whatever noise we make up about that, which is probably not true. So that's what the channel is all about. Try to release an episode roughly every week. and it's on all the podcast places as well. And then I've got a number of books. They're on Amazon. If they serve you and they're interesting, you can just look me up and see them. Unleashed is the one that I talk about my sons and my journey through autism and how we applied the work of Ross Greene and Bruce Perry and Stuart Avalon. Those are the brilliant people. I just applied their stuff. And my most recent book is how to reduce the issues at work and how to build up your resilience, because I'm noticing the resilience skills just aren't there. Some of it's very funny. There's some very funny work stories that I changed enough to protect the innocent, but they're real. And some of it's just, here's 14 little skills you can use and enjoy better. And I should make a 15th one, which is theme music walking in, because I actually do have walk-on music. There's a technique I use in the back of my head.
That's perfect. I'll have, yeah, like Chris said, I'll have everything in the show notes. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this, it would really mean the world. First and foremost, share it, at least with one person, and share it far and wide. You never know anyone who's going through any challenges that you might or may not know, because they could be struggling or suffering, in silence. They might not be talking about it. This could enhance their parenting. This could enhance their business and their leadership. If this has benefited you, please share it with at least one person. And leave a comment, a review, whether it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube comment, whatever it is, helps the algorithm, helps more people discover the show and the wonderful conversations that we're having here. And it means the world that you're here. Thank you again. And Chris, as we wrap up, anything else you'd like to say in closing?
No, just super grateful for having this conversation. You're a bright light in this world, and we need lots more bright lights. So, here's to creating that. Listeners, Jamil, I know you already do that. Let's create a lot more bright lights, because the world needs it.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, brother. And so, I've called this podcast Transformation Starts Today. The reason why I call it that is I find most people's favorite day to change their life is tomorrow. And that's why they stay stuck. But you can be different. You could think about and apply, most importantly, what Chris and I discussed today. And you could say, what's that gold nugget, whether it with my children, with my team, with myself, that I could begin applying. There's gold here for you. Don't just listen once. Listen to it a handful of times, 2, 3, 5, whatever it needs to be. Every time you're going to get more from it. Then apply. And I can promise you, if you do that, you'll say, that podcast changed my life. That 90 minutes or so that I spent as an investment of my time, I got leaps and bounds of a return on that investment. And that's what, I know, speaking for myself at least, that's what I want for each and every one of you. So thank you so much for being here. All my love to you and your family. And I look forward to being with you next time. Take care. Awesome. Thank you for being with us today. If this conversation served you, it would mean a lot if you left a review and shared this with anyone who may benefit. An extraordinary life without regret is available to you now. Choose it. It's your time.